Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Jane Eyre vlog series. As always, I'm your co-host, Sarah Hurley.
And I'm your co-host, Medea.
And today we have a very special guest star for our episode on final thoughts on Jane Eyre and adaptations and Charlotte Bronte's other works and all things really having to do with this novel that we've been going through for the past month. We've got Maizie Ferguson with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Maizie?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I'm Maizie Ferguson, and I'm a blogger for JASP. You might know me from my Lovuary series that I did back in February, and I've also been going through Charlotte Bronte's novel Shirley, which just concluded today, and I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Shirley, since everybody here is familiar with Jane Eyre. We've been yapping about it for the last 2 months. Let's take the viewers to somewhere new. What can you tell us about Shirley?
Shirley was Charlotte Bronte's second novel. It was published in 1849, and it is the story of it's a more social story than Jane Eyre. It focuses a lot on what was happening in England at the time it's set. So it's set in 1811, 1812. So we've got the Napoleonic Wars. We have a lot of Industrial Revolution happenings going on. And so the plot, while it focuses mainly on four young people and sort of their romantic exploits, it also has that kind of backbone of history. So that is in a way different than Jane Eyre. It is third person, omniscient, a narration, and it follows each character sort of in turn. Like each character gets a couple chapters, it seems like, but there's not a specific number of chapters per. It just kind of depends. You get to the next chapter and you're like, okay, now we're in Robert's perspective. We're kind of getting to see his thoughts. And then the next one we get Shirley. Something that I think is really interesting about this novel is that the title character isn't introduced until chapter 11. So with Jane Eyre, you're automatically in the world of Jane Eyre. You know who she is, first sentence. Second. And with Shirley, you're focused on a lot of different characters. Then chapter 11, you get to Shirley. And then another main character isn't introduced until chapter 23, which is over halfway through the novel. So it's really interesting how there doesn't seem to be one specific storyline that's more important. It just focuses on how a lot of lives intertwine. And so it's been a really interesting read.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about how these lives do intertwine? Like, what's the plot? What's the narrative structure of the novel?
Oh, yes. Okay. We start out with Caroline Helstone, and she is a rector's niece, an orphan. And she is in love with the mill owner in their town, Robert Moore. He's originally from Belgium, so he's labeled as a foreigner because people in Yorkshire are sort of territorial. And even though he's been there for a few years, he's still kind of an outcast, and he's pretty ruthless. The start of the novel, he's ordered new machinery for his mill and laid off a lot of workers, a lot of Industrial Revolution things going on. And people are very unhappy about that. And for a while, it seems as if he might love her too, but then he kind of spurns her. So Caroline is dealing with all of these feelings. And then sort of right in the middle, when she's feeling pretty hopeless, we are introduced to Shirley Keeldar, who is an heiress, also an orphan, who has come of age and returned to her family home. And she, sort of like Emma Woodhouse in Emma, kind of takes this poor, naive younger girl under her wing, and that's Caroline. And so they form a friendship, and there's a little bit of drama because Caroline believes Shirley might be in love with Robert, and more characters get added. And I think at its heart, it's really a story of romance and people finding love. But because of all of these things happening where they live too, geographically, and there's like also a lot of violence too, with things going on with these unemployed workers. There's just a lot happening, and it gets pretty exciting.
That sounds so juicy. I have not read it, but I will have to read it whenever I diminish some of what's already on my TBR list, because it is pretty long. But yes, that sounds fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think it, because we do work for the Jane Austen summer program, how it stands with Jane Austen's fiction? It is the Austen versus Bronte season. So can you tell us about a little bit about that?
Well, as I was reading, I was trying to keep that in mind, and I felt that there were a lot of elements that could seem almost like Austen. There's, I think, the dynamic with Shirley Keeldar, this sort of rich, independent heiress, is very reminiscent of Emma. And the way that she kind of goes about her life, trying to improve the lives of people around her, even when she's a little oblivious to how she's treating them, or just trying to put her hand in, and it maybe is not working out super well for her. So that was a kind of a nod to Austen there. There is a proposal that I thought strangely reminiscent of another proposal in Austen. The word bewitched is used, and I was like, that immediately makes me think of something we probably are familiar with. And there was another thing that also kind of struck me was the portrayal of all of these rectors and curates and men of the church. There are so many characters who are involved with church duties in this novel, and a lot of them are very flawed characters, which Austen was really kind of a genius at. All of these different characters, Mr. Collins, Mr. Elton. We start the novel, Shirley, with three curates, three young men who are just kind of all bumbling about, not really knowing what to do. And then Caroline's uncle is a rector. He's very stern and severe. And then there's Mr. Hall is also a rector in the story. He's probably the most stereotypical in a good way. But there are a lot of men of the cloth who don't really know what they're doing. And so that reminded me of Austen quite a bit.
That is delightful. Okay, that's actually, I want to read it more, so I'm super excited. Nadea, do you have any questions for Maizie? I think I've asked all of mine.
I think, well, I mean, since we're discussing Jane Eyre, I guess this kind of leads into our grander discussion that we're about to have. But I'm curious, since you've read both Jane Eyre and Shirley, how you feel Shirley works as kind of like a follow-up, or not a follow-up, but as Bronte's second novel, how you feel it fares in kind of the, not the shadow of Jane Eyre, but like following such an iconic novel.
Yeah, great question. As I did some research about Shirley, I realized that it did not have a good reception at all, really. It was not popular, and people in the time it was published were disappointed that it wasn't more like Jane Eyre. But I really feel like they're difficult to compare because I almost feel like they're two different genres. Jane Eyre is very gothic, and I don't think Shirley's gothic at all. And so I feel like if you kind of go about reading it in a way that this is something completely different, then you're going to enjoy it. But if you're going into it with that kind of expectation of more gothic drama, then you're probably going to be a little disappointed, which a lot of people in the mid 1800s were. Personally, I did not love Jane Eyre when I read it the first time. I was in middle school, and so I don't know what it was, but I didn't love it. And so I thought, I just don't love Charlotte Brontë. That's what I thought. So I was a little hesitant actually to start Shirley because I had this kind of idea in my mind, but I read it, and from the first I was like, wow, it's hilarious. It's very well written. There's a lot of French elements to it. It's very much a romance without those kind of gothic tinged edges. So maybe that's just me personally, but it's very different than Jane Eyre. But I think it is very, it shows off Charlotte Bronte's writerly talents very well. It's very, I think it's like sparkling. Like you would think, how would you be able to describe like Jane Eyre and Shirley? Like Jane Eyre would be, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like a darker shade. And with Shirley, we have kind of a lighter shade, but they're both really talents of her writing fiction.
Do you think that difference has anything to do with like subject matter, or do you think it's more in terms of like writing style? Or...
I would probably say subject matter, just because I haven't read Jane Eyre in a long time, so I'm not exactly sure how the writing style differs, but I definitely want to go back to Jane Eyre now that I've read Shirley. I feel pretty inspired, honestly, to go back and read it with a different eye. Yeah, I don't really know, but I think subject matter probably, and also the time in her life in which she wrote it. Jane Eyre, she wrote, all of her sisters were writing at the same time. They published pretty soon after each other. With Shirley, she wrote Shirley over the course of the year that all three of her siblings died, and so that changed plot elements. There are a couple illnesses in the novel that were supposed to go further, but she changed her mind after her siblings passed away. And so I think that the time in which she wrote both novels definitely had a huge role to play in the outcome and the general style of both.
That's great. I think one thing I would be really interested in, I think as I read Shirley and as you read Jane Eyre, I think it will be really interesting to look at how the first person versus third person narration plays a role in cultivating this very different vibe that the books are giving off, because we've got this very, very, very intense first person narration that really characterizes the novel in Jane Eyre. It's framed as an autobiography. That was originally the subtitle, Jane Eyre's autobiography. And just this like addressing of like, dear reader, and you find out it's Jane telling her own story 10 years after she marries Mr. Rochester. You know, like that's a very, very characteristic part of the novel, of what people think of as Jane, or not Jane's, of what people think of as Charlotte Bronte's writing style. And to hear that Shirley is so radically different, verging on like a proto free indirect discourse type of narration is really interesting. So it would be fascinating to see how the narration styles hold up against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. In Shirley, there is the address of dear reader, or even little interjections in parentheses, especially after bits in French. So there's a lot of French because we have these Belgian siblings, and at times there's a little note afterward like, find me a better word, reader, otherwise I must stick with French, or something like that. And it's kind of fun because you get an idea of Charlotte herself as she was writing this and making those decisions.
That's awesome. I love that. I'm super excited to read it. All right, viewers, I think that wraps up our conversation on Shirley and Jane Eyre, unless something happens to pop up later, which, you know, we're never supposed to. I think now we're going to transition into our conversation about the many, 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 many Jane Eyre adaptations that have been produced over the years. Today, we're only going to be really focusing in on 3 of them, and that is Orson Welles' radio play adaptation from the 40s, so quite a bit older than anything else we're looking at, and then the 2006 BBC miniseries, 4 episodes, beautiful, a highly respected adaptation within the Jane Eyre fandom. And then I think the most recent adaptation to come out, the 2011 film version, which I don't think is necessarily as widely beloved in the fandom, but we will talk about all of these things as we get there. So should we go in chronological order and discuss the radio play first? Or how do we want to tackle this?
I have an urge to share that my favorite of the 3 adaptations that we experienced for today was definitely the miniseries, and my least favorite was the film. I think for similar reasons, I guess, because the miniseries felt in some ways a little less true to the books in that both of the protagonists were not as plain or or ugly looking as they are described to be.
That is one qualm that I have with both the film and the television series. None of those actors were ugly. None of them were ugly. That is like the defining.
Yeah.
I want to say character trait, physical attractiveness.
Yeah.
But that's their like one defining feature that Charlotte Brontë states over and over and over again. She's like, Jane Eyre is plain. She's ugly. She's not attractive. And I'm like, you're trying to convince me by putting her hair in an unflattering updo and giving her like no makeup look that Ruth Wilson is ugly? No, like that's a lie. You can't fool me. You're trying to give him a terrible haircut and tell me Toby Stephens is ugly? No, that doesn't work. I don't believe you. Not a single the actors playing Jane or Mr. Rochester was ugly. And I'm like, no, these are like that's like their whole thing is that they're supposed to be ugly and match each other's freak. But also, none of the adaptations are they as weird as they are in the books.
Yeah,
and I let you continue talking about.
I love how passionate you are about this because I totally agree. I was watching the miniseries episode 3 with a group of the girlies here at Oxford, and we're all just watching, and we're at the part or one of the parts where he's like, "Do you think I'm ugly? Do you think me handsome?" And she's like, "No, I don't think you're handsome." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" So I definitely agree that they strayed a bit from the source material on those points.
You who maybe have not seen these adaptations, we should put pictures of them on the screen so that you can see just how conventionally attractive these people are. It's absurd.
Like bad hairstyles for sure. They were something to be desired. However, everything else was just fine.
Very, very attractive people. Anyway, besides the relative attractiveness or unattractiveness of the leads, can you tell us a little bit about what makes the 2006 miniseries A, your favorite of the adaptations that we looked at, and B, what makes it deviate so much from the novel, like you were saying?
I found it to be, in my opinion at least, I felt it was more true to Jane's character. Like throughout the episode, she seemed far more passionate, far more outspoken, and kind of less willing to like temper herself. Versus in the 2011 film, it felt a lot more subdued, and I think everything felt more subdued. Jane for sure felt quieter to me, and I felt we were missing some of that like fire that I feel like she has in the novel. So that was one of the reasons why I for sure preferred the miniseries, is because she did have that passion and emotion and was very outspoken.
Guys, this might be sacrilege, but I liked the miniseries more than I liked the book. Like, look, don't judge me. Okay, everybody who has been watching the series from the beginning will know that I am a Mr. Rochester hater. I am not Team Rochester. I don't like him. But the series made me I was like, kicking my feet, giggling, watching it. They were so cute. I also think that one thing that they really, really downplayed in both the film and the television adaptation was the horrifically disgusting age gap between Jane and Mr. Rochester. I did some research, and Toby Stephens, who played Rochester in the series, was 35 or 36 at the time of filming, while Ruth Wilson was 23, 24, which is only about a 10-year age gap, which is still not ideal. However, it's way better than 18 and like 42. Because one of the major defining descriptors that Jane Eyre comes up with for Mr. Rochester is, yeah, he's old enough to be my father. Which is a really weird thing to say about your love interest, girl. That's not epic. And then they made it even less weird for the film in 2011. Michael Fassbender was 32, 33 at the time of filming, and Mia Wasikowska, may or may not be how you pronounce her last name, but it's what I'm going with, was 19 or 20. So she was actually at the perfect age to play Jane Eyre. But once again, Michael was 10 years younger than Rochester's supposed to be. So that's like a huge deviation. So not only are the Mr. Rochesters not objectively bad looking, they're also much younger. And I think they know it's because modern audiences would not be able to stomach the fact that there is a 20+ year age gap between the romantic leads. That, like, I get it in the 1800s. Okay, in the 1800s, it was still a little weird. She still says he could be my father, and that's weird. Okay, look.
He also calls her his child bride at one point.
Yes.
Which I remember we discussed at length in a past episode.
What a thing to say about your bride-to-be. That's such a thing to say. But yes, I do really think that they watered that down for modern audiences because they knew that nobody would be able to get on Team Jane and Rochester if they didn't. That's like not a digestible age gap for modern audiences. And like they did imply that he was older than she was, but nobody in their right mind is gonna think that Toby Stephens is like 45. Like, that's just not a thing that's happening. Anyway, so that's my little spiel on the age thing, because that was a really big change that stuck out to me. But I think one thing that I really loved in the 2006 adaptation was, did it dedicate a lot of time to Jane's backstory and time at Lowood? No, not compared to the novel, but it dedicated way more time and way more attention to that part of her life than the other adaptations that we looked at, compared to the radio play, which was literally one line. I spent the first 18 years of my life at Gateshead and then at Lowood School, and that was it. That's all you got. And I was like, girl, these are formative years. But we have a young Lucy Pevensey from Narnia playing young Jane Eyre, which is so cute. She's precious, and it kind of opens as well with this young Jane imagining herself in an exotic desert. And you know, we get so much in the novel of Jane's fantasy world where she resides when things get really rough in her real life. And I thought it was so cute seeing those scenes played out on the screen.
That was one of my favorite additions, I think, was because it's such an important part of the novels, Jane's imagination and her love of literature and her use of novels as like a form of escapism. And though it confused me when I first started watching, because I wasn't sure the right version of the of the series, once I realized what was happening, I thought it was a really, really sweet allusion to that important like concept and factor of the books. Or the book, I guess.
I also thought in terms of like early life events that the 2006 version paid much better tribute to Jane's relationship with Helen Burns. Like, I'm still saying, like, we got breadcrumbs of their friendship, which is so important in the novel. But we still got more than the 2011 movie, or like, God forbid, the radio play, which says nothing. And then we also get hints of her later on in the story with like portraits of her that Jane has painted, and Adele's like, oh, who's that? And Jane's like that was my friend. And like, you can see that it was important. Anyway, so I really enjoyed the way they treated the first part of the novel. And then of course we get to Thornfield, and everything's pretty much the same for a little while. One thing that is fun is we get this red scarf blowing from the windows that keeps reappearing, and that's our first sign that something might be amiss at Thornfield. And I just thought that was like really fun and a cute little way. And like, it ties into other things that I'll talk about later, but I thought it was really fun. And Mrs. Fairfax is like, oh, that's just Grace Poole. She does the laundry. Ta! And she's like, okay. Anyway, then she's going out on her walk through the moors, whatever. And this is when we meet Mr. Rochester. And when he rides out of the mist, he's on a black horse with his black dog in this black cloak. His hair's black. It's raining. He looks like the devil when he rides out on his horse with Violet at his side. He looks so scary and evil, and it's just like this all black ensemble. I would personally think that like the devil had come to take me to hell if I met this man on the side of the road. And he's so angry, and he looks so deeply unpleasant. He's yelling, and he's got this frown, and he looks like such a deeply unpleasant person to be around. But I actually do think that their meeting was executed very well, just because of like all of the black. I was like, this man is giving devil on the side of the road. Which I just appreciated. Anyway, so then, we get their development. It's pretty classic, pretty standard. It adheres to the book as well as I think any adaptation can be expected to adhere to a classic novel in the modern age. But then we start getting like a distinct Mr. Rochester that was not in the books, who I kind of was like, oh my God, like, he has hobbies. That's kind of cute. We learned that he has a thing for biology. Jane finds in his study, he's got all of these specimens of like and birds, and he's got all these books and everything. And I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, like, he has a personality now? That's kind of cute. You just like gotta get a man in STEM, and then I'm like, okay, so what? Did atrocities. But yeah, anyway, and then we get this really cute scene where he's giving Adele a biology lesson down by the pond. And you can also tell, I think in this adaptation, way more than the 2011 film, where he literally just does not act like he likes Adele at all. He's like, your mother charmed the English gold out of my English pockets. Get off me. And I'm like, dude, like why do you act like you're like, you don't hate this child? Like, girl, give her some sympathy. But I thought this adaptation was much sweeter in regards to Rochester's relationship with Adele. But there's this really, really cute like biology lesson scene where they're out by the little pond, and then he gives Adele this little talk about a firebird and how it dresses in gray to disguise itself and make itself seem little and plain, but that really, when you catch a glimpse of it flying in the air, it's got these like beautiful red feathers, and it's like very much he's looking at Jane and being like, Jane, the firebird is you. Like, not at all. But then I thought it was super cute that in like every scene after that, Jane starts wearing a little red necktie with her gray dresses.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Right, it's giving to All the Boys I've Loved Before, when Laura Jean starts wearing her hair down in every scene after. Peter Kavinsky is like, I really like you with your hair down. I was like, wait a minute, that's so cute.
I
Then
love how this adaptation has so radically changed your view on Mr. Rochester as a love interest.
I would still like in the novel, I don't like him. I do not like Mr. Rochester. I like this like OC Mr. Rochester, non-canonical Mr. Rochester. Just this one version. That's it. Anyway, so that brings us to the fire. The bedpost fire, the bed curtain fire. Would you like to say some words on I know you
Yeah, that was it was an interesting scene to watch. The 2011 version I thought it was just, the fire was there, whatever, blah blah blah. Dare I say, the 2006 miniseries made this the sexiest thing ever. Because there's like the fire and she like comes and saves him, and it's just like in the book. But then they have like the moment after, and they're so close, and you see like their silhouettes, and there's like the fire, like the actual fireplace in the background, and they like move closer, and he gives her his coat, and I'm like,
I think it is worth mentioning that when she first breaks into his room because there's a fire and she's like, what is going on? He's got this like long, flowy white shirt that is open. You see his bare, chiseled chest, abdomen. Like, that is worth mentioning, okay? This is a period piece. That is scandalous. It's very sexy. Very nice.
Yeah. It's a good scene. Good scene to watch.
That is good to watch. Then I think one thing that I really, really liked, again, in this adaptation that we don't get in many of them, except the musical, which we can talk about a little bit later, Maizie, we get the portrait scene where she draws her self-portrait and then draws Blanche Ingram's portrait and compares the two to remind herself, oh, I'm just this lowly, plain, simple governess, like Blanche's marriage material. I am not. But we get a really, really nice scene that lays that out, and I think really showcases some of Jane's feelings toward herself that are so derogatory and like really sad to watch. But I think that makes her growth throughout the novel even more satisfying to see as a viewer or a reader. So I really like the portrait scene. And then of course we get Blanche Ingram's party coming in with the Ingrams and the Eshnans. And I think it's so funny that we see Jane and Adele like spying through the doorway on their party, on Blanche, and like seeing them show up in like the swishy dresses and dancing and everything. I'm like, wow, they are just like us for real. People are always people. And then we get something that also not a lot of adaptations want to confront, which is the fortune teller scene, the really freaky fortune teller scene. But once again, they knew that in itself would not be palatable for viewers. That would not be palatable the way that it's written when Mr. Rochester dresses up as this freaky little fortune teller to just cause drama, to stir the pot, to gaslight Jane and trick her feelings out of her because he's a little freak. But they knew that would not be cool for a 21st century audience. So really, like, Rochester is paying this old woman to be a fake fortune teller, and he's hiding behind the screen and listening in. So it's not as weird. He's not an old lady rag. He's just listening. Like, he's still creep about it, but they've downplayed it once more. Did you have any feelings about that, Nadea? Because I certainly did.
Yeah, I did. I remember I was watching and I was like, I don't see like how they did the makeup for this. Like, how did they make him look like? I was just so confused, thinking from like a filmmaker perspective. I was like, how did they do that? And then he came out from behind the screen. So it was like, okay, that makes sense. But I thought it was really interesting how, and I feel like they did this kind of throughout the series, but he seems a lot more like mischievous instead of just like scheming, if that makes any sense. Like a playful mischief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Which I thought was also probably done to make him a little bit more palatable.
no,
But I thought it was a fun change.
a lot more of his conversations with Jane are expressed in a more like jokey, fun, bantery manner instead of him being so serious and so severe all the time, just being like, oh, I'm gonna command you. I am the master of this house. You listen to me. I'm 25 years your senior, like blah 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 blah. It's they have like much of a much more like jokey back and forth kind of thing going on. They're always laughing and smiling when they're around each other, which I think, and they also, the number of times they interact and interact pleasantly, it goes way up in the miniseries versus the novel. There are a bunch of elements added that we don't get that I think make them a much more palatable pairing for modern audiences. And that kind of like comes out, I think, especially when the like the moment that I was like turned, where I was like, okay, wait a minute, I can like Mr. Rochester a little bit as a treat for this miniseries exclusively, was when she's leaving for Gateshead and he's giving her the like 10 pounds and whatever, and it's like, it's really cute. They have like a really cute bantery moment where he's like, well, I only have 50. Okay, you can have 10, but you have to come back for the other 5. Like, you have to come back. And then he's like, well, he follows her and he's like, well, I don't know how to say goodbye. And she's like, you say like, farewell, Mr. Rochester, and like, now you say it back to me. And he's like, well, I don't like those words, so I'm gonna say, don't go, Jane. Like, what will I do without you? And he's like holding her hand, and I'm like, wait, that's so cute. So I think that like a lot of their interactions are spun in a much more positive light than they originally appear in the novel. And I think that like maybe that's the way Charlotte Brontë intended for them to come across originally. But I really just think it's more of like creative license and interpretation on the filmmaker's part. But it really does make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's definitely, it makes it all feel, I think in some ways a lot more lighthearted, versus the novel, because Mr. Rochester is painted as so strict and severe. Feels a lot darker even when like nothing dark is happening. But I feel like the miniseries really, it made him a fun character. Like he didn't seem like a total stick in the mud like all the time. Like he made jokes and he bantered a little bit.
And I think their relationship altogether is so much more playful in the series. Like even once they've had their love confession, they're gonna be married. My favorite scene was in the carriage when he's taking her out shopping, and he keeps trying to hold her hand in the carriage. He tries 3 times and she smacks his hand away every time, and then she just like bodily moves Adele to be sitting in between them, and he's like pouting like a little puppy. Oh, like I thought that was just so cute. It's so like wholesome and innocent, because I feel like so much of their relationship in the novel is characterized by like actual severe gaslighting and manipulation. Like it is hardcore unhealthy. I like, nobody can read it today and not see blatantly how unhealthy their relationship is. Like, even if you're like, oh, like, but it's okay to like toxic men, in fiction. Like, yeah, true. I like Klaus Michelson, but I can still admit that he's a terrible person. Like you still have to be like, yeah, he's a bad person. But I think the series does a really good job of showing that, yes, he can be strict and severe, and he can say things too harshly. But he's also like, underneath it all, he has a heart of gold. And I think also, like you were saying today, they do a great job of emphasizing Jane's personal strength, which combats any of his harshness or severity that's kind of coming to light. Anyway, so then we have, of course, the big Bertha reveal, which is exciting. I thought that those scenes were really well done. I especially loved after everybody had gone in and seen Bertha and she'd attacked Rochester and they left, as Mr. Rochester was giving his speech, Jane was just like completely silently sobbing so hard, like the tears just kept running down her face. And I thought that was just incredibly well acted. Once again, just relying on Jane's strength as a character to hold and carry the scene and bring that emotional weight. Was there anything you wanted to talk about with the Bertha reveal? Because I think that that's such a fantastic moment in the story in general.
I mean, this is just another fun anecdote, I guess, but I watched that scene as well with some of the girls here, most of whom had no familiarity with Jane Eyre. So I was trying to, and like a couple of us did. So we're like trying to explain, like, here's what's about to happen, and like they're getting married, but they can't. And they're like, well, who is that man that just came in and said they can't get married? And so we're trying to explain everything, and then they're like, he's got a wife, what? So it was fun to watch people who didn't know the story experience that moment, because I do think they do it really well. They paint it in a really it like, I feel like, plays into the gothic a lot. But I think that's important for that moment, because it's definitely a gothic reveal to show that he's got a wife locked up in the attic and has for several years. But I think they captured the energy, I think, in that moment, with like the pacing and like the editing there, and the music as well. And I feel like I mean, I knew what happened, and I was so engaged and thrilled by this reveal.
I think one thing that makes it so engaging is they've done such a great job of making Rochester into a sympathetic character in this adaptation. Like, I feel very little sympathy for him in the novel and in the film adaptation. I'm like, I don't care. He doesn't show any sort of remorse about what happened. Like, objectively, Rochester is the villain of the story, and you cannot convince me otherwise. But I think through flashbacks are another very useful tool that we get in this adaptation that we don't get in the novel or the film. We get flashbacks of Rochester's past that really help sell the, like, actually Bertha kind of sucked angle, which I don't believe is canonically true. But once again, for this adaptation, I will let it slide. But I think you're so right. It's very, very engaging part of the story. Really makes you desperate to know what happens next.
I think that's another thing that I feel like the miniseries profits from, is having it as a miniseries and being able to like have these kind of cliffhanger moments. I don't know actually if my copy certainly isn't, but I don't know if Jane Eyre was broken up into volumes upon like original publication. No. But I know a lot of novels, at least from the era, were. And I feel like having the miniseries in 4 episodes really captured that kind of like, what will happen next? We have to wait and see. We didn't have to wait and see. We have streaming now. But I think having those kind of like breaks in the narrative allowed it to, allowed each episode to kind of ramp up to that moment in a way that just made it all the more thrilling, because that episode ends with this big reveal, and Jane is obviously very upset by it. But we don't see the aftermath just yet. I think it benefits from holding that from the viewer, even if just for a little bit.
For sure. And that brings us to our last episode, which was really well done. Of course, Jane has returned to Moor House. Things are very different here, though, because in this version of the story, Jane's got amnesia. She doesn't remember what happened to her, which really confused me at the beginning. I was like, is she just faking not knowing what's going on so she doesn't have to tell stuff about her past? But then, like, the more that we went along, she kept having these weird flashbacks, these very erotic flashbacks of her and Mr. Rochester, and I was like, what is going on? But having these flashbacks. So I was like, okay, I guess she really does have amnesia, which I thought was just like a weird thing that they added just for drama, I guess. But I think it's interesting because Diana and Mary, St. John's sisters, the Rivers sisters, they're actually the ones who give her the name Jane Elliott instead of her giving a fake name, because she really doesn't remember who she is or where she's been. And of course, one thing that I loved, because we all know me, I'm a Rosamund Oliver lover. Rosamund's in this adaptation. She's never in anything. Which of course, like, she and St. John still have a tragic romance, but I was just so happy to see her. I was like, that's my girl. But yeah, so we get these really weird, steamy flashbacks. Would you like to elaborate?
Do I have to?
We don't have, but I feel
like I was also definitely confused when I first saw them.
They just make this adaptation so different from the novel.
Yeah, I was like, is she dreaming? Is she like fantasizing? Like, what's happening right now? So I also was a bit confused, but I mean, I guess that's one way to get your memory back.
Yeah, no. So just for context, for those of you who might not have seen it, these flashbacks are of the conversation where Mr. Rochester, after the Big Bertha reveal, is convincing Jane to like run away with him to France, and they'll live as brother and sister with a chaste kiss on the cheek on birthdays and all of this stuff that he like totally does not mean. But like it in this adaptation, they are like kissing and making out, and then his hand disappears from the screen, and you're like, buddy, what are you doing with that hand? Like, that hand is going somewhere, and Jane is making some sounds, and I like, which is so vastly, radically different from the novel, because Jane is so chaste, so morally upstanding, so pious. She would never allow that to happen in the novel. Jane would be like, nope, you are violating my relationship with God. You are violating your relationship with God. This is not Christian at all. You have a wife. I'm leaving. And I like, it was just so bold. It reminded me very much of the 2008 Sense and Sensibility that opens with Mr. Willoughby having sex very blatantly with Colonel Brandon's ward, who's 15. So like, definitely an interesting choice. It was an interpretation of that scene.
Yeah, definitely a choice for sure.
Anyway, then the end kind of comes in this like rapid fire succession, and we get this really visually stunning scene of Bertha breaking into Jane's room where she'd hung her wedding dress before she left and setting it on fire, then dragging it through the halls of Thornfield up onto the roof. I loved that scene. I just thought it was like breathtaking visually and
so cinematic.
Right, so cinematic. Just like that's the best use of the like film medium.
This is what film was made for.
Exactly. So we've got that. Then of course the fire, and Jane hears Mr. Rochester from across the country, across the kingdom, the land, and they reunite, which is actually like cute. I hate it here. And Mr. Rochester is appropriately to the novel super jealous when he learns about St. John, and he's like, it's not in like a gross possessive way, it's in a really cute way. He's literally pouting like a kicked puppy who was left on the side of the road. He's like turning away from her like, was he at least stupid? Like, I get it, you said he was hot, but was he at least stupid? And it was so funny. I really loved that. Then of course she's like, no, like, you're the one that I love. I want to be with you forever. And it's cute. And then they're like kissing in the grass. And I'm like, oh, maybe I am a romantic. And then my favorite part was the epilogue. It was so cute. it was Jane and Mr. Rochester and their kids. We get to see their kids, and the Rivers sisters, and just like the family, the extended family, and everybody gathering on the front lawn in front of Thornfield for a portrait, like a family portrait to be painted. And you see St. John like up in the corner because obviously he's out doing his missionary work. He can't be there in person. But like it's just really cute and wholesome. And once again, just a more playful tone than the novel. But yeah, that's how it concludes. It's really cute.
I think it's a way to bookend the series. It's so beautiful just because that's like all Jane's wanted the whole time, is to have this family, and then she finally gets it, and to see it right there is just, it's so gorgeous.
It's a much more Austinian conclusion
Mm.
than
It sounds like it. It does.
right. And for those of you Austen fans, I think it's really fun to note that you likely recognize one of the actresses, Christina Cole, who was in this series. If you've seen it, she plays Blanche Ingram, Mr. Rochester's kind of alleged love interest for the first part of the novel. She also plays Caroline Bingley in Lost in Austen, which is a super fun mini-series from 2008. She also plays Mrs. Elton in the 2009 Emma adaptation that BBC did. And she plays, okay, look, this is just Austen adjacent, but it's got Colin Firth in it, so it's basically Jane Austen. But she plays Amanda Bynes' character's evil almost stepsister in What a Girl Wants, which came out in 2003, which is a really fun coming of age movie. You should watch it if you haven't. Like I said, it's got Colin Firth. Really fun. Anyway, but yeah, just for you Austinian aficionados out in the crowd, I thought I would mention that because Christina is a huge Austen veteran, and it was really fun to see her come back as Blanche, because I feel like she always plays that like beautiful catty character, like Miss Elton, Caroline Bingley, Blanche Ingram. She definitely has a typecast. But like that's really fun and cute. But yeah, so I think major takeaway, we liked 2006 best. It did not really hold up to the film, which like was fine. I think the only thing worth noting really about the film, besides Mr. Rochester's heinous beard in the inside, because that should be illegal. I think the one stylistically interesting element that I found with the film was the way that it begins with Jane's flee from Thornfield. You see her like rushing across the moor and then collapsing in the middle of this barren landscape, and it's super dramatic, super gothic. And there's this thunderstorm, and then the story is told through these flashbacks that are interspersed within Jane's account to the Rivers siblings of who she is and how she got here. And then so like by the time we get to the midpoint relatively of the film, that's like we're caught up to where she started, which I found to be a really interesting way of framing the story. I mean, I didn't think like it was no better or worse than just starting at the beginning, but I thought it was really interesting, and like I was not opposed to it. It gave the story definitely a different framing, which I thought was something very unique about that film. So then I think the only other main adaptation we wanted to hit was Orson Welles' radio play, which is a different medium, totally different time period. What do we want to say about that? Like I mentioned earlier, her whole backstory is one line at the very beginning. So we can go ahead and knock that out of the way. What else is radically different, Nadea?
I don't know. I thought it's so interesting because the thing about a radio play is it has to be so much shorter than obviously a novel or a miniseries or even a film. So what they chose to omit, such as the very important backstory, I thought it was interesting to see what like the producers must have thought was important and what wasn't important. And I feel like it's indicative as well of the audience that they were kind of going for.
Yeah, so basically it's like Nida is saying, it's a much shortened time frame. It is less than 30 minutes long. So we've got this whole 500-page novel that we're getting in maybe 26, 27 minutes, which is crazy. But, you know, they were doing what they had to do. I gotta get that listenership, I guess. So everything is at a very accelerated pace. Jane hears the eerie Bertha laughter night one, the first night she gets there. She meets Rochester within 2 to 3 minutes of the radio plays beginning, when, you know, it takes her, I think it depends on the version that you're reading, but it takes her over 100 pages to meet Mr. Rochester in the novel. So much of that
we
is
didn't even meet him in our first episode of
right. No,
the vlog, I don't think.
Like, she does not meet him for forever, but she meets him within the first 2 to 3 minutes. Where is Adele? It is mentioned briefly that Jane has come to Thornfield to tutor Adele. That is the only thing we hear about Adele. She's not featured. She's not a character. Nothing else is said about Adele. And there's no, like, development of Jane's time at Thornfield, like, getting to know anything that goes on in Thornfield whatsoever. The Mr. Mason injury scene where he's gone to see Bertha and she attacks him and then he's, like, bleeding out. And Mr. Rochester is like, Jane, you deal with this while I go fetch a doctor. That is heavily dramatized. I'm guessing for effect, sensationalism, something's got to sell this show that's really just a gothic romance drama. And also, Mr. Mason's injury is like the middle point of the radio play, just to like give you an idea of how convoluted the story
pacing was interesting. Very interesting pacing.
Yeah, it was really weird. Jane never goes back to Gateshead. That's like not a thing that happens at all. There's no fortune teller scene, once again, because that's not palatable for reasonable audience members. And there's also no interaction with Blanche. She's like mentioned offhandedly as some girl Mr. Rochester has like a thing with. Almost immediately we have this proposal, which cuts like right after the proposal immediately to, if anybody has any reason that these two should not be, like, they're in the church immediately after he proposes. And then Mason barges in. And then literally there's this line where she says, a year and a half went by after she's fled the scene, completely cuts out anything with like St. John or the Rivers or Uncle Eyre. She never gets her fortune, never gets her inheritance. Jane ends up writing to Mrs. Fairfax, like, hey girl, so like what happened a year and a half ago? I'm just feeling a little bit nostalgic. I need to know. And like, so Mrs. Fairfax writes back to her. So Jane like goes to Fairfax and it ends with them reuniting. One good thing is it does dive a little bit more deeply into Charlotte's epilogue as written. So she does say like, I've now been married 10 years, blah, 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 blah. It talks about the part where Rochester regains his sight after a couple of years of their marriage, and it details the birth of their first child, about how he could see the child with his own like black eyes staring back at him, which I thought was like, that did a little bit better justice to Bronte's original ending than some of the other adaptations. But yeah, those were my thoughts on the radio play. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look this up to be sure, but I wonder if perhaps they cut so many characters for the sake of like all those behind the scenes type things, such as paying people to voice said characters and all that stuff. I feel like that definitely had to have an impact. But I also think it's interesting to kind of consider those factors for like any adaptation really, because I think cost and production, et cetera, definitely plays a role in what decisions producers and other like people in charge make about adaptations. And I think it's always really interesting to see how that affects the transition from the source material to the different medium, whatever that may be.
Right. But Jane Eyre adaptations, not to lead you on in any way, they definitely don't stick just with radio, television, film.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Eyre adaptations are everywhere. Like there is a musical that Maizie and I are going to talk a little bit about. Maizie, would you like to give a little bit of information about the Jane Eyre musical? That's a really interesting take on the story.
Yes, it's definitely been a while, so you may have to jog my memory, but it is a like really beautifully poetic rendition, I think, with and I think it's a medium that you may not expect to go hand in hand with Jane Eyre, like Mr. Rochester singing. You know, that's just not something that would come to your mind when you are reading the novel, but it is really seamlessly adapted to the stage, and with song. Um, I think that the songwriters they really did a fantastic job of moving the story forward through song. That's not something I've really looked into very much or studied at all, but as far as musicals go, and seeing others and listening to soundtracks, I think they did a really wonderful job of adapting and keeping the themes and the atmosphere of the novel in a very different medium.
Right. And it sounds very appropriate.
It
Sonic,
does.
the songs are written in a very traditional musical theater style. So if you're more of a fan of Hamilton, Dear Evan Hansen, Be More Chill, Next to Normal, this is probably not going to be your kind of musical. I think sonically, I would compare it pretty closely to like Disney animated musicals of the 90s. So like it sounds a lot like the music from Beauty and the Beast, Anastasia, Hunchback of Notre Dame, like Notre Dame, whatever. Be French and fancy about it. I for one am from the South. Um, but like it sonically, it's very reminiscent of those pieces, which makes sense because it was being written and workshopped throughout the 90s. It debuted on Broadway in 2000. So totally makes sense why it sounds like that. But like it's very, very traditional, almost a little bit opera-y at times.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's giving 1800s. Like you're gonna love it if you like things like Jekyll and Hyde, Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera. Like it's very much in that vein. It feels historical. It feels period appropriate. I think one thing that I really admire about the musical is they have the guts to do the fortune teller scene as written with Rochester in drag. And he puts, as he's singing, like it's so important that y'all know this, he puts on this like terrible high-pitched granny voice that's wobbling, and he sings like this, and like that's hilarious. That's really funny. So yeah, there's a musical. There are countless book adaptations. One of the most famous is, of course, Wide Sargasso Sea, written several decades ago by Jean Reese. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. All my apologies if I am not. I've read that. It's fairly short, but it's all about Bertha, whose real name is not Bertha, it's Antoinetta. And Rochester just gives her the name Bertha because he doesn't like her name because he's a jerk. But it's detailing her time growing up in the West Indies, her courtship and marriage with Rochester. And some of it is from his perspective, but it's really all about like the very racially driven prejudices against Bertha coming from like the Dominican Islands, the West Indies, Jamaica, like all of these very like racially these like these racially divided and what is the word that I'm looking for? Anyway, it's not important. Anyway, you can cut all of that out. But so it's like it's a really I think, racially charged prologue, but one that's definitely worth reading. It's really good, and I think it does a great job of detailing Mrs. Rochester's descent into madness, and whether or not it was completely like truly just something that was going to happen to her no matter what, or if it was fueled by a lot of Mr. Rochester's actions. Really good retelling. Then, of course, we've got lots of young adult retellings like Brightly Burning, which is a sci-fi rendition written by an author who's also done several Austinian young adult adaptations, I believe. I think they were on one of our best YA Austen adaptations book lists for JASP. I should know, I wrote them. However, that was a really long time ago, guys. I was still in college. Then there's My Plain Jane, which I actually just finished reading this morning. It was so good, so funny. Oh my gosh, it's so good. We've got Jane as a character. We've got Charlotte Brontë as a character who's Jane's best friend. And then we've got this other guy who's the like star agent at the Royal Relocation Society for Wayward Ghosts or something like that. And there are ghosts everywhere. Everybody's possessed. Mr. Rochester becomes significantly less creepy, and Jane does not have to end up with him. Spoiler alert, she ends up with his age-appropriate son. So, who's also named Edward Rochester. But anyway, it's like a rewritten version of the story, which is super fun because Charlotte is writing, like, it's fun, it's very meta. It's also by the same people who wrote My Lady Jane, which recently became a Prime series that I really want to watch. But then we've also got, like, coming out soon or either just came out, Escaping Mr. Rochester, which is another young adult adaptation that I'm super excited to read because it really dives into the fact that Rochester is a villain, and it's a love story between Jane and Bertha, which like they like join forces to take him down and like run away together. And I'm like, objectively, that is a better story than like what is going on in the original. But yeah, so lots and lots of good adaptations. They're everywhere. Look for them if you love Jane Eyre. They're definitely worth reading.
Well, Shirley, comparatively, has like 0 adaptations. There was a 1922 British silent film, which is lost to history, and a radio drama that the BBC did in 2014 with Joanne Froggatt from Downton Abbey, for Downton Abbey fans. But it's just a dramatized reading of the novel. So, no film, no play, no musical. And as far as I know, there aren't any literary adaptations either, no retellings or related novels. So it was really sad to read this book and be really invested in the story and be like, okay, that's it. I mean, if I want something, I'm going to have to make it myself. So that's very interesting, too, how the legacies of these 2 novels have held up throughout time.
I mean, like, I'm sure there's something on, like, AO3.
I was gonna say, you could check, like, Wattpad or somewhere. Fan fiction, yeah. I'm sure there's fan-written works about it. I would hope so, at least.
Yes, I hope so.
All right. Well, I think if we've wrapped everything up, this concludes the Jane Eyre vlog series, which has been such a big project.
Yeah, it's been,
guys.
Thank you. It's been for sure a massive project. It's been so much fun though, just being able to experience Jane Eyre for the first time with all of our viewers, and all of our blog readers, and with you, Sarah, and now with you, Maizie. It's been quite the experience. It feels it's definitely more fun reading the classics when you're not reading them.
Thank you again so much for joining today, Maizie. It was so fun to have you be a part of this. Thank you to all of our viewers for staying around this long and listening to us jabber on and on and on about this novel and these characters. You've been lovely to talk to. We hope you listened and didn't fall asleep. That would be really sad for us. And also thank you to everybody at JASP who supported us in this project. Delisha, Inga, Eric, David, y'all are great. And I think that leads to a plug for donations.
Please, please, please consider donating to Jane Austen Summer Program and Jane Austen & Co. Me and Sarah and Maizie do all of our blogs and our vlogs as volunteer projects. And we really appreciate donations because they help us fund the technology that we use to produce all this content. So they help us keep the website updated and maintained, and they help us film all these lovely, lovely videos for you all. So please consider donating if you like watching stuff like this, and it would help us to make more.
Thank you all again so much for watching. If you would like more content like this from the Jane Austen Summer Program in the future, if you want more vlogs, if you want something like this but in a podcast series, just be sure to let us know. You can email us or leave something in the comments. Just keep us posted. What do you like? All right, thank you all again so much for watching along with us. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future from the Jane Austen Summer Program, if you want more vlogs or if you want something more like this but in a podcast format, just let us know in the comments below or send us an email. Just reach out in some way. I think other than that, this concludes the Jane Eyre vlog series. So I've been Sarah Hurley.
I've been Nadea Pugh.
And I've been Maizie Ferguson, your guest for this last episode.
And we will hear from you later.
We'll hear from you. We'll see you again. Don't worry. We'll be back in the future.
We'll be here.
Yeah, we'll be here.
Okay, bye.